former chairperson. Given a role as the former chairperson of Council of the Northwest University and former chancellor of Vaal University of Technology, we felt it was imperative to ask her to have her engage us as the African Union Club at Wits. She is also an avid advocate for women's rights, having spoken out against patriarchy and also speaking to how patriarchy still plagues us as a nation and as a continent. This Mbokodo of note actually served as the Commissioner of the South African Human Rights Commission and currently serves on the African Human Rights Commission, on the African Commission of Human and People's Rights, which is an organ of the African Union. Without further ado, please allow me to introduce and welcome Advocate Faith Pansy Tlakula. Dumela. Abshi. Thank you very much. Thanks for that introduction. I'm going to sit down, is that okay? You know, I'm a grandmother, and I've been running to this place with the traffic and then I got lost as well inside this campus. You don't have to remember any of the stuff that she said. All that you have to remember is that I'm a grandmother. That's all that matters. I was a student here 34 years ago, and I've got mixed memories of this university. At that time, we had to obtain the consent of the Minister of Interior or something like that to attend this university. Black students did not stay on campus. They stayed at a residence called Glen Thomas, which was at Baragwanath Hospital as it was then known. In 1983, we became the first black students to stay on campus. And I stayed at the Sunnyside Women's Rest at that time. There are people here who are from Sunnyside. Yeah. At that time, I'll tell you, next to my room, there was a bathroom which I used. I had to myself for the whole year because white girls were so traumatized to have us there. We were 4 of us. They couldn't share a bathroom with a black girl. That's the history of this university. I'm glad that it has almost transformed, I don't think, completely. I think there's still issues, but I'm not here to talk about that. I'm here to talk about human rights in Africa. Being the chairperson of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights for 11 years. Not chairperson and commissioner, chairperson for 2 years, for 1 year, and commissioner for 11 years. Members of the commission are elected by the AU heads of states and governments for a period of 6 years, which is renewable. Unlike other organs of the AU, there is no term limit in the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, which means that if you are so inclined, you can be commissioner for life. But I'm not so inclined. I'll just have 2 6-year terms, which finishes next year in November. In addition to being the chair, for the past 11 years, I've had the privilege of serving as the Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Expression and Access to Information in Africa, which means that I look after the promotion and protection of the rights to freedom of expression and access to information on the continent. Yamkela, I am grateful that I have been able to do this. You would recall that I met you in Addis Ababa in January this year when you attended the meeting that was called by the chairperson of the AU, had a session with young people. And when we met, you invited me to come here, and we have been trying hard since then to make this happen. But because I'm never at home, I travel all over the continent, I was not able to come until today. So I am quite pleased to be here. When I spoke to your chairperson, I said, you know, it's old-fashioned for particularly talking to young people, to expect, you know, young people to concentrate when a middle-aged woman reads a paper. It's boring. And concentration spells are not, I don't have a long concentration spell to listen to people's speeches for sure, particularly this time of the day. So we have to make it a little bit interesting. I thought we'd have a facilitator who would engage me and ask me, prompt some questions that we would then deal with and engage. I don't know how many of us know about the African Union and its organs. Can I make some assumptions that people in this room do know about it? Can we make that assumption? Yes, no, yes? Assumption? People who know about the African Union and how it works. Can you raise your hands? Eh?
That's why they must be members of the club. They will do it.
Only one, but this can be, I'm sure people know him. You must have read about, yeah, people who read, you know. Let me tell you, when the summit was here, the African Union summit was held last year, this year, was it last year? Last year, in June. I attended a pre-summit meeting of non-governmental organizations at the Nelson Mandela Foundation. And the room was full, and I asked the question, who knows what this is about? And people said, well, we don't know. We see these people are here, we don't know who they are, what they are looking for here, what they are doing, who invited them. And then they are going to come and go. Nobody will tell us why they were here and what they were talking about. So that's the nature of the AU. So I will not go. I had a few introductory remarks about the Constitutive Act of the AU, which puts human rights in the center of the African Union. If you look at the objectives of the Union as articulated in the Constitutive Act, in the preamble as well, you find human rights is quite central. It talks about one of the objectives being promotion and protection of human rights in accordance with the African Charter on Human and People's Rights and other relevant human rights instruments. Then the Constitutive Act of the African Union establishes a number of organs. Key among them is the Assembly of the Union, which is heads of states, the Executive Council, which is foreign ministers, the Permanent Representative Council, which is ambassadors of African countries who are based at the headquarters of the AU, which is Addis Ababa. You have the Pan-African Parliament, which is based here in South Africa in Midrand. You have the African Court on Human and People's Rights based in Arusha, Tanzania. And then you have the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, the oldest organ, based in Banjul, the Gambia, which is where we are based. The functions of the Assembly as well, if you look at it, one of the functions of the Assembly is to ensure that the decisions that are taken are implemented. And one of the decisions that they can take in terms of Article 30 is that if a government has come into power through unconstitutional means, then it shall not be allowed to participate in the activities of the Union. And then you have the Peace and Security Council, which was established in terms of a protocol that amended the Constitutive Act of 2000. And this was established in 2003, and it's an organ established specifically to look at prevention, management, and resolution of conflicts on our continent and to establish early warning mechanisms for conflicts. And then one, I've already spoken about the commission on which I serve, which is a commission which in terms of Article 45 establishes the mandate, which is promotion and protection of human rights, research, interpretation, and so on. And then the court, of course, it's a court of law. It adjudicates on complaints of human rights violations. My commission as well, our commission also receives complaints of violations of the African Charter and adjudicates on those complaints. But the commission is a quasi-judicial body. Its decisions are not binding. It makes recommendations. Now, there are others, so the AU, without doubt, the African heads of states have created a body of knowledge and institutions to promote and protect human rights on our continent. The big question, is it working? And if not, why? How is it supposed to work? For our commission, for instance, what we do, at every summit of heads of states, and the summits are held twice a year, in January and in July, June, July. As it is now, we have just come back from summit of heads of states, which was held in Kigali, Rwanda. So at each summit, we submit a report of the activities that we have undertaken. Promotion activities and protection activities. Promotion activities means that we can go out to a country to look at what a country is doing in terms of promotion of the rights that are in the Charter. We just don't rock up. We have to write a nice letter called a note verbal, because all this is through diplomatic channels. So we write to a country through the Department of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and say, we want to come, and they say, yes, you can come. This year, I have been to Swaziland on a promotion mission. We can talk about that. Last week, just now on Friday, I have just come back from Kinshasa, where I was there for 5 days on a promotion mission. So that's how promotion missions work. I have spoken about protection mandate, which means that we receive complaints of violations of human rights from individuals and from non-governmental organizations. We can also receive complaints of violations of human rights from one state complaining about violations against another state. Since the commission was established 29 years ago, we have only received one inter-party state complaint. We call the complaints communications. I think the second one we received now, where there is a complaint against Burundi and Uganda, I think by the Congo, by Rwanda, something like that. I can't remember the details. So what we then do is that after we have done our work, we then have to write a report of our activities, and we submit our report to the Assembly of Heads of States and Governments. But the Assembly has delegated this function to the Permanent Representative Council, which is ambassadors of African states who are based in Addis Ababa. You sit like this in a meeting, you face 54 ambassadors, as I have done in Kigali 3 weeks ago. You submit your report of all the activities that you have undertaken. The report also contains the situation of human rights on our continent. And what we have decided to do is that in this report dealing with the situation of human rights, we talk about positive developments in human rights, but we also talk about challenges. And this is where the trouble comes, because when we talk about challenges, we mention countries. And once you mention countries, all the ambassadors who are sitting there have to protect their countries. and you come up under immense attack to say, why have you mentioned my country here? Why have you mentioned? But we feel that maybe that's one of the ways in which we can nudge countries to do better, because if you talk in generalization to say there is a problem of freedom of expression and journalist safety on the continent, it doesn't say anything. You have to say, in this country, this is what happened. In this country, this is what happened. In addition to that, we can do also investigative missions or fact-finding missions where we are requested by any of the organs to go into a country to do an investigative meeting. Case in point, practical. Last year in December, the Peace and Security Council, which I spoke about, which is an organ which is supposed to deals with prevention of conflict, requested the Commission to undertake a fact-finding mission to Burundi. And we were there in December for a week. Those of you who remember, Burundi, Bujumbura was in lockdown on the 11th of December, where there was shooting the whole night and the whole day. I was in Bujumbura on that day, saw it for myself, what, that kind of conflict means. So once we have submitted then our recommendations, the heads of states are supposed to then take a decision on what to do with those requirements. Normally, they would have a very standard sentence in the decisions. If you go to the decisions of the AU, in fact, you can go into the decisions of the Executive Council. The Executive Council, this is how it works, is the permanent representative councils, which are ambassadors. The ambassadors report to the Executive Council. The Executive Council is made up of foreign ministers. Foreign ministers then report to the Assembly of Heads of State. So the Executive Council and the summit will have just, in our case, they will just say, we encourage member states to improve their human rights record and to implement the decisions of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. Full stop. But because implementation is such a big issue, last year there was a resolution that was taken which said that the Executive Council, the AUC, which is the African Union Commission headed by Dr. Nkosazana Zuma, should conduct a comprehensive study on the status of implementation of all the decisions that have been taken and submit a report in January 2017. Because at every summit there is a perennial problem of non-implementation of the decisions that are taken. Institutions are created, they are not well funded. They take decisions after decision after decision. Those decisions are just there to gather dust. But there is hope. I'm not saying that it's all doom and gloom. All of us in our small corners, we try to follow up. I mean, like our commission, once we have made a recommendation, whether after investigations of a complaint or after visiting a country, we then, when we go back to that country, say I went to Swaziland, I made certain recommendations. When I go back, I say to them, but I gave you these recommendations. What have you done with them? Apart from that, each country is also supposed to submit a report every 2 years on the measures that they've taken to implement the charter. So when they come, we say, when you submitted your last report, these are the recommendations that we made. So before you actually give us the report itself, you must then start with the implementation of our recommendations and give us a report on that. And in that way, we find that we are able to push the envelope a little bit. Human rights work is tiring. You take 10 steps forward and 20 backwards. That's how it works. But giving up is not an option, because this is our continent and we have to make sure that it works. Another way in which we work is that the Commission has special mandates. I've told you that I'm the Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Expression and Access to Information. We have the Special Rapporteur who looks at human rights defenders, another one who looks at the rights of women. You then have one that looks at refugees, internally displaced people, and migrants. Then you have working groups, one dealing with transitional justice, another one deals with people living with HIV and those at risk. There's another committee that deals with extractive industries and human rights violations, in that it's relevant today because of the commemoration of Marikana, when we talk about extractive industries and human rights violations. There's another one that deals with economic and social rights. So we really do this work. So what then happens is that in between our sessions, we meet twice a year in sessions, in April, May, and then in October, November. We meet in Gambia, Banjul, the Gambia, unless a country has invited us to sit at their country. This year, in October, November, we go back to the Gambia, but next year, April, May, we go to Niger, because Niger has invited the commission to sit there. But in between the sessions, we receive requests from organizations, from individuals to just intervene. I can tell you that I have been so busy. July, August, I had to write a letter on the situation of freedom of expression and journalists. There was the Lesotho issue. There was Zambia. There was Zimbabwe, Mozambique. Today I've just written a letter, South Sudan. Today I just wrote a letter about Burundi, about a journalist who disappeared. And they don't know, he just disappeared into thin air. Those are usual occurrences of journalists who just vanish and they disappear forever. Nobody knows. They are fetched by national intelligence or by police and they are never found. So these are issues that we deal with. Once we get the letter, we verify whether the issues are indeed there. If they are there, then if you can verify that there is merit in what has been reported to you, you write a letter to say, this is what I have received, to the government to say, can you intervene? As a commissioner who is a national of a country, you cannot intervene on issues relating to your country. Commissioners are assigned countries. I'm responsible for Swaziland, for Lesotho, for Burundi, for Mauritius, and South Sudan. And so far, this year it's only Mauritius where I haven't had to intervene. In all the countries that I've mentioned, I've had to intervene just this month. And then you'd ask me, the question would be, what about the situation of freedom of expression in South Africa as it relates to the South African Broadcasting Corporation? With that, because I could not write a letter, because I'm a national of South Africa, the commissioner for South Africa is based, in Uganda, he's Ugandan. So he wrote a letter to South Africa, as he did with the issue of Marikana, as he did with the issue of xenophobic attacks. And I must say that our country is one of the few countries where, when we write to the head of state. We don't go about writing to the minister of this and that. We write to the head of state and say, these are the issues. And in respect of South Africa, when we wrote about xenophobic attacks, we received a response under the signature of the head of state here on what the government has done to deal with that issue. When we wrote a letter about Marikana, we received a response on what the government was doing. We will see if we'll receive a response about the SABC. Angola, I wrote a letter about the disappearance of a journalist, not disappearance, he was arrested on writing an article. In other countries, they still have laws like criminal defamation, publication of false news, insult laws, If you write something about the president, sometimes you can even just say, we haven't seen the president for 6 months. There is a rumor that he is out of the country on medical treatment. You can be arrested and prosecuted. It's not a joke. And prosecuted for either insulting the head of state or publication of false news. This journalist in Angola had written a letter about what he called blood diamonds. Very famous journalist who had also award-winning. And we wrote and said, but what about this? And the government responded and said, this matter has got nothing to do with you, the commission. Is a private matter between the journalist and the people that he defamed. But at least they responded. Other countries, you get no response. Lesotho, in all fairness, when I wrote the last time, they also responded. So I'm giving these examples to say to you, it's not like it's all doom and gloom and that the system is not working. The system is working a little bit, but you have to be very persistent. And you must remember, this is not a paying job. Nobody pays you. You do these things out of the love of your continent. You travel all over the continent. It doesn't matter where or how, as long as you're there. And you have to just keep on pushing and pushing and pushing. Not all of us have that tenacity. Some of us, we get tired of pushing. Others, we have the staying power to push because we want to see improvements on our continent. I think I want to leave it here. I know you have lots of questions that you want to ask me, so that we can go to the questions and we're not out of here too late. So that's how far I want to take it. I don't have a paper, I'm sorry, I was away. I voted. After voting, I went to Mozambique that day, came back and went to the DRC, came back on Friday. And today I had a speaking engagement at Turkey's where they were talking about the reform of the electoral system, whether we should reform it or not, and have another electoral system. So I've been running from pillar to post, so I apologize that I don't have a written presentation. Thank you very much. That's how far I take it.